morning, Robert, to the Business Influencer podcast. It's -4 outside. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's quite good to be talking about technology and to be talking about how it's allowing us, despite -4 outside, to be able to do this podcast. But look, before we kick off about 5G, I'm intrigued, Robert, what brought you to the West Midlands and what brought you to WM5G?
Thanks, Ninder, and hi everyone. So yeah, delighted to join you for this podcast about 5G. A bit like you, I was thinking this morning how nice it would be to have my car remotely warm up and do various other clever things. So what brought me to WM5G, or West Midlands 5G, which is the business I lead, was really the opportunity to try and help improve people's lives, people's businesses, and public services through the application of 5G technology, which we'll talk a bit about obviously today on the podcast. Prior to doing this role, I spent about 20 years working in the technology industry focused on telecoms, doing a combination of roles in strategy, looking at helping companies grow and improve, and also most recently running a portfolio of new businesses at a large mobile operator. What I'm really passionate about, and what I'm hoping we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about today, is how technology can make a real difference to solving problems and creating opportunities for people. So what's brought me here to this discussion and my role, working closely with you and others in the West Midlands, is really the ability to hopefully affect some really positive change on a region-wide level. And hopefully I can give you some real examples of where we're starting to do that.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's get down to real basics. And I know this because I get this all the time. So what is the difference between 5G, 4G, and broadband? Now, look, most people, their only understanding of 5G and 4G, or any G you want, is on their mobile phone, because when 5G turns up or it drops to 4 or to 3, you can tell people think, oh, the signal has worsened or it's got better. As the number gets higher, 3, 4, 5, whatever I'm trying to watch will become clearer. Whatever I'm trying to watch, I can watch more of. The bandwidth is better, and whatever I'm watching becomes crystal clear to watch. That's their understanding of 5G and 4G and 3G. Of course, everybody's got broadband. So maybe you can just break that down for those who know actually around 5G, know more than that really.
Yeah, absolutely, Ninder. So as you rightly say, obviously 5G is the next generation of mobile phone technology. Typically, we tend to go through a cycle globally of mobile phone technology approximately every 10 years. There's no sort of set date, but 4G started launching in the UK in about 2012. So what 5G does, building on your points, is really 4 things from a technology perspective that are different or better than 4G. So the first is what you've just mentioned about speed. So it's 10 to 100 times faster than 4G. So imagine, being on a train or a bus and wanting to catch up on a film on Netflix, and imagine being able to stream or download that in seconds rather than minutes. So the first thing absolutely is speed. The second thing it does, though, is it enables many more devices to be connected together. So yes, as you say, it is a little bit about smartphones and apps and all the amazing things we've become used to in a 4G world, but it's also about the Internet of Things. So if you imagine that everything in our lives is getting connected, some obvious examples being, for example, cars. Every new car for the last few years that rolls off a production line has a SIM card in it, for reasons actually of health and safety, as well as navigation and other services. And as that number of connected things grows, we need a technology that can support it. And 5G can connect 20 times more devices per square kilometre than 4G. So it's really designed to future-proof the world we're living in at the moment for all of these connected things, not just in our lives as consumers, but also for businesses and public services. The third thing it does is it gives us all the ability to guarantee how quickly data arrives at devices. And I think the best way I can explain this is through an example. So if you imagine something like a manufacturing production line or a really critical public service, like, for example, healthcare, you need to have that data flowing between potentially devices guaranteed in real time down to 1 millisecond. And you can't do that with 4G. All of the data traffic has equal prioritization potentially, but you can do that with 5G. And I'll give some examples of where that's really valuable. And then the fourth thing it does is it improves security, it improves reliability and availability. So it's just easier to use. So those are the four main differences between 5G and 4G. To explain the difference finally with broadband, so as you rightly say, we're all relying on our broadband as well as our mobile a heck of a lot these days during lockdown. Typically, we tend to use broadband either in our homes or in our places of work as a fixed connection with Wi-Fi on top of it. So there may be some areas where 5G starts competing with broadband. So one of the mobile operators in the UK, for example, if you want to replace your fixed broadband connection with a 5G router, a 5G device, you can do that. But generally speaking, I would say the technologies are complementary. We'll tend to use our broadband as our fixed connection with Wi-Fi at home and in our places of work, and we'll tend to use our mobile connection in other environments, such as being on the move.
Now, I know there's variability depending where you are in the country on how the signal drops or improves. So how much of the UK has actually got 5G coverage? And projecting forward, if it's not that much, when will we be in a position when it's nationwide? It covers the whole area.
Yeah, this is a really important question, because, as you say, it's quite hard imagining the benefits from this new technology until we've got a critical mass of coverage and us being able to have the devices as well. I was delighted that in the West Midlands, we were first to launch, I think, in all of our three major cities, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, and also Coventry. We have about 13% of the population covered at the moment in the West Midlands through 5G. And the way that that's happening is essentially the mobile operators are upgrading the existing 4G sites, starting in the city centres, because they're the locations where you tend to reach most people, and then moving out. So it's about 13% population coverage at the moment. But there's another third of mobile phone masts that are being upgraded at the moment to 5G. So to answer your question of where we're going to get to, it's hard to forecast it precisely. There's not a sort of agreed set of targets or anything, but I think we're going to be at 40 or 50% population coverage in the next couple of years. And while it's really important that we get to 100% or as close as 100% as we possibly can, I think that starts to provide a critical mass of coverage that hopefully we can start to see some of the benefits. So we're starting, but I think really it's going to be the next few years that we really start to see it extending, hopefully beyond city centres into suburban and other locations.
We're in the middle of probably the worst recession we're going to have for 300 years. The government is desperate to level up. Can 5G be part of that leveling up?
So I certainly hope so. So to your question, clearly we're going through an extremely challenging time, as you say, both economically, socially, and from a health perspective. So what I believe the UK economy needs is it needs technology that can help us recover and grow over the next 10 years. And what's been really interesting, as I think a number of us have observed, is that during lockdown, while there's been lots of terrible things happening, we've actually also seen the acceleration of a number of key digital trends, the most obvious ones being the ones we experience as consumers: e-commerce, telehealth, remote learning, etc., etc. Looking ahead, if we want to grow the economy further and recover, it's critical. It's critical that we support the digital transformation of our industries. And if I take a couple of examples, so, as you know extremely well, we have amazing strength in the West Midlands in manufacturing. We are the heartland of the manufacturing sector, with something like 20% of jobs, just under 20% of our economic output coming from that sector. And there's a huge opportunity in that sector to help the diverse supply chains of manufacturing businesses become even more productive, even more successful, to recover growth through the adoption of new technologies that enable them to do things like keep their machines running for longer, producing more goods at a lower cost, helping them improve safety in their factories. And 5G is something that we're testing and proving to do that. So I think it can make a big difference in terms of existing industries. Clearly, it's not going to be there suddenly in the next 6 to 12 months. It will take a number of years to build the network rollout and to get the products on board. But also, I think it can make a big difference in terms of new industries. I mean, when we think about the world, our kids and others are going to be living in the next 20 or 30 years, things like the low carbon economy, things like a completely different transport system. And again, I'm delighted that we're pioneering in the West Midlands things like having 5G connected high definition video cameras on road junctions so that we can use aggregated anonymized data to control traffic flows and thereby reduce pollution, help people get around more easily, as well as innovate in other areas. So I think it has the potential to make a huge difference. And in case we forget, being a leader in this type of new technology globally also complements other technologies, things like AI, big data, the Internet of Things, as I was saying before, and robotics. And it will really encourage further inward investment in skills. It will encourage more businesses to locate here. So I think it can make a big difference to economic recovery.
Now, in terms of adoption then, digital adoption, how will it accelerate that? I mean, you've just talked about on transport, cameras, you talked about cameras. So how will somebody on the street know that 5G is really making an impact, other than, as usual, deferring back to their phones?
Yeah, so I should say, firstly, in answer to that great question, I hope that we get to a point that 5G is so successful and so intrinsic to our lives that we don't know it's there, because I think that's how many of us feel about 4G. But in terms of how we get there, I think we've got to focus on where are there use cases, where are there things we can do differently and better that make a real difference to people's lives. And I just want to take a couple of examples that I think are things that, hopefully people might say have the potential to do that. So I think an obvious starting place, given the current crisis, is health and social care. And I think, as you know, about 18 months ago, I was delighted to work with Universities Hospitals Birmingham, one of the largest NHS trusts, and BT, one of the large mobile phone operators, to trial the potential of 5G to help paramedics in an ambulance provide better diagnosis and therefore better patient care at first point of patient contact, so the moment they arrive on an emergency scene. And specifically what we did in that trial was we showed the potential for 5G to connect a paramedic many miles away from the hospital in an ambulance back to a doctor in the hospital, so the doctor could effectively guide the paramedic to do an ultrasound scan remotely, thereby enabling the paramedic to better diagnose what might be wrong with a patient and line up the right clinical support. That's something that can't be done via 4G, because you have to have the speed and the high definition images of the ultrasound scans going to and forth. And it's not just about ultrasound scans, it's about any procedure that requires high volumes of data. So it could be low powered X-rays, it could be a number of other things. So I think so I think to get it into the hands of people and to get people seeing the benefits, we have to address use cases that make a real difference in people's lives. Since we've done that, we have extended, as you know, our health and social care trial to also look at how we can provide remote care and diagnosis in care homes. And that's particularly important because a number of them don't have fast broadband connections, and also the clinicians with whom the patients need to interact on the other end could be anywhere. So they need robust connectivity. So I think to address your question of how we get it into people's hands and how we use it to drive digital adoption, we need to have some really, really strong use cases, and that's what we're pioneering in the West Midlands.
From what you're saying, for technology to work, we're going to need some really skilled people.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do some of the stuff you're talking about with having some really, really well skilled people.
That's absolutely right, and this is where I'm excited about the job creation potential. So let's break down where we need those skills. So on the supply side of the market, we clearly need throughout the UK now groups of skilled engineers who can go on top of rooftops and do a high quality job in changing 4G mobile phone masts across to 5G. As you work through the technology stack, we need people then who can develop new applications and services, who can develop new hardware, who can develop new data solutions and link all of that together. But in addition to those kind of, if you like, technology skills on the supply side, we also need to support our colleagues on the demand side. So in organizations like the health system, to understand how to use this technology so they can better perform their duties and jobs, what the commercial advantages are of doing so. And actually, I think it's that side of things that in some ways is actually the biggest opportunity, but also probably the biggest challenge in terms of adoption, is how we can make sure that these new technologies like 5G become embedded into that process. Something we're hoping to drive through our 5G accelerators, these innovation hubs, which we've launched in Wolverhampton, Birmingham and Coventry, is very much an introduction to 5G that hopefully starts people on that journey around skills and capabilities.
So if we're talking about demand side, talking about skills on the supply side, are there some sectors that naturally fit the criteria for 5G?
Yeah.
Demand?
I think so. So I guess it's probably worth me saying firstly that a bit like 4G, I think what we're going to do is rapidly discover what all the use cases and benefits are over a period of time. So I'm going to talk about the ones that we're unearthing now, but I think there are many more to come. And what's really important is that we lead this process of experimentation in the West Midlands and hopefully in the rest of the UK as well. So the ones that we're seeing at the moment are definitely focused on industry and definitely focused on public services as a starting point. So the example I was mentioning earlier around manufacturing, so there were some pioneering 5G trials done in Worcester, one of the neighbouring regions to the West Midlands, where they worked with BT again and also Worcester Bosch, one of the largest boiler manufacturers in the UK. And essentially what they proved was that by having pressure sensors on machines in the Worcester Bosch production line connected via a high-speed, low-latency 5G network back to their data and analytics platforms, they could start to do something called predictive maintenance. And predictive maintenance means you can start to identify through the vibrations of a machine on a manufacturing line when it's likely to start to fail before it fails. And that's really valuable because you can then fix that machine during downtime as opposed to it breaking while the production line's running. And normally, a bit like, I guess, fixing your car or any mechanical object, if you can detect the fault in advance, it's normally cheaper and easier to fix it because the whole thing doesn't fail and break. In addition to that, they also piloted a second use case, which was remote servicing. So these are obviously incredibly, complicated bits of machinery, lots of electronics, and actually through giving a skilled engineer augmented reality goggles, what it effectively enables them to do is to connect to a support center with even more practiced engineers, and for very complicated failures in the machinery, somebody can effectively guide them through a fix that they may never normally need to do, so may not be familiar with it. So there's all those. And then what we announced a couple of weeks ago was extending those types of opportunities to support manufacturers through in the SME sector, which accounts for, as you know, the vast majority of manufacturing in regions like the West Midlands. So we've launched a 5G private network in a manufacturer called AE Aerospace, who are one of the leading medium-sized businesses working on production and manufacture of aerospace components, and also one in MTC, which is a facility dedicated to supporting SMEs to adopt. So I think traditional industries like manufacturing. Second example I've already mentioned is healthcare. essentially the opportunity in healthcare is that ability to bring all of the expertise that exists in different institutions, different parts of the NHS together at point of patient need, rather than people having to travel around. So whether it's a journey in an ambulance back into a hospital, or whether it's patients being referred, actually, if we can empower, carers in a care home, for example, in our elderly people trial, or paramedics in an ambulance, to be able to access the knowledge that exists, from the clinicians in the hospital, then we can provide better patient care, and also we can help make the system more productive. So we've got 3 trials running in healthcare: the connected ambulance, the residential care homes, and also next year we'll be doing a pilot of some pioneering work to help with the early diagnosis of certain types of cancer using 5G. The third area where I also think there's tremendous opportunity is around transport. So the transport sector is by definition a mobile sector. It's very hard to get fixed connections onto trains and road traffic and scooters and everything. And really what we've been focused on in transport is how can we both address the green challenge of making things less polluted, less congested, and also help people get around. And I think when you see, traffic levels back to pre-pandemic levels now, how we use technology such as pollution sensors, HD video cameras, and also over time sensors in vehicles to help manage those flows and encourage people in a safe way back onto public transport, and to use new cases of transport is going to be critical. And finally, just to some other examples, we've also been piloting some quite radical use cases around certain aspects of the transport experience, such as, for example, putting 5G cameras onto council vehicles that are driving around the streets as part of their normal job, and using images from those cameras to effectively help people find parking spaces more easily. We've been testing the opportunity for 5G also to help visually impaired people navigate public transport more. But you know what? I think as a final comment, Ninder, I think those examples in industry, and I think those examples in public services are just the beginning. And I'm really excited also about some of the emerging consumer use cases as well. We've all seen gaming go through the roof during lockdown. We've seen streaming go through the roof. And I think we're starting to see some really interesting applications of 5G to enable experiences like augmented reality. And I hope that when we get to do the Commonwealth Games in the region in Birmingham in 2022, we'll start to see some of those amazing 5G services live as part of that experience.
Look, Robert, this sounds incredible. And some of the sort of implications for society are just incredible. But it sounds very expensive. It sounds we need a lot of money. Both, we talked earlier about the supply side, but all the technical equipment, and I mean, is this really, really expensive? Is it prohibitively expensive? And who's going to fund this?
So I think that's a really important question. So let me start with the consumer side, and then I'll talk a little bit about business and public services. So on the consumer side, I think we're now all even more acutely aware of the digital divide and digital inequality and digital poverty. And obviously, I do really worry about the fact that, as you say, a high-end smartphone with 5G on it, is a very expensive luxury device that for many people just simply can't afford. So I think first and foremost, the price of these devices and access to these devices will come down over time. But where there are business critical or public services critical needs, I think we need to look at where are there different models for funding the benefits from this technology. So, for example, there's been some pioneering work done in Liverpool where they've sort of done a similar project around helping elderly people in their homes benefit from connecting to a hospital to get better care and avoiding the need to go into hospital. And in some cases, that's been in deprived areas. And effectively, the hospital has paid for the connection into people's homes, because essentially they can see the benefits in terms of the better care they're receiving. And unfortunately, the people involved couldn't afford to do it otherwise. So I think we have to look at some new business models for this technology, while if it's appropriate, to make sure that it doesn't increase the digital divide and inequality. And finally, I think it's worth me saying that the government is investing very heavily in improving mobile coverage, which will include over time 5G, and also broadband in rural communities, which have traditionally suffered in locations in terms of having poorer coverage than urban areas. So hopefully we'll see those benefits extend out. On the business side, and on the public services side, obviously the investment's got to be justified in terms of improved revenues, in terms of improved benefits, and in some cases cost savings. So I think everyone's acutely aware of that. And what we want to try and do is to find models that make it very easy for businesses to adopt this new technology without having to face big upfront costs and risks. So some of the things that we're doing around our test beds in the West Midlands in the next 12 months, we'll be looking at how we can reduce those barriers and make it easy and hopefully reasonably priced to adopt the technology.
And the reason for the public sector to be involved in this, is it because it wasn't felt that the private sector could run with this? Was there market failure, or what was the rationale for the public sector to say, actually, we want to do this in terms of place and how the place performed? What was the rationale behind the public sector getting involved in this whole 5G?
It was purely opportunity driven. So there are lots of opportunities in the private sector around industry. Talking to senior leaders in different public services, I'll focus on health and transport in the West Midlands. It's clear that there's always been an ambition in our plans and in our visions to go further to enable better outcomes on the transport side in terms of the green environment, in terms of people getting around more easily. So I think there's a stat that the average speed of a car journey now in central Birmingham is something like 17 miles an hour. We all understand why that is the case. We invested in road infrastructure largely a number of decades ago in the UK. Urbanization's increased. So we've always known that we want to transform our city centres. We want to get more people on public transport. We want to provide a better passenger experience. And on the healthcare side, we've known for many years that we've got a challenge, as many economies have, with an ageing population. Despite the fact that we invest in the UK something like 12% of our GDP in our health service, demands are rising, and we need to find new and better ways to do so. So very much what we've been trying to do is work with those stakeholders who are the customers for this innovation to try and find where are there areas that 5G and other technology can make a difference. On the health side, as I say, I think the insight that we've gleaned is that by helping the experts, which are amazing people distributed across the whole health sector, help other colleagues at first point of patient contact, whether it's an ambulance or a care home or somebody who's doing a test to see if they may have cancer, that has huge value, because it avoids people, for example, having to go into your GP for a 10-minute appointment, having to be referred to somebody else. It may not do that always, but it certainly can do sometimes. And equally on the transport side, having the ability to help the traffic flow more easily, to help people get back on board the metro system. So we've been doing a lot of trials with Transport for West Midlands, using things like 5G to connect the CCTV cameras on the tram system for a number of public safety reasons, including social distancing, and also using technology that you might be familiar with, LiDAR, which effectively scans the environment. It's built into some phones these days, and that can be helpful in identifying problems in terms of the infrastructure of the railways as well. So it's purely opportunity driven. And quite rightly, we're being measured against the benefits that 5G can deliver for these public services.
You've referred to the NHS quite a few times, and the sort of benefits it could bring to the human race, if we get this right. But there are a lot of people out there who actually argue the reverse, and they're arguing that actually there are a lot of unquantified and untested and unresearched health risks from 5G, and they think of the masts and they think of the radiation, and I still remember when the mobile phone in its infancy, people said, it give you brain damage, and
Yeah.
of course, and of course, we know just as coronavirus hit this country, there was some major attacks on en masse. So, are there health risks, or is it just too early? A bit like the vaccine, they're saying it's too early yet to know if there are any health implications from 5G.
That's a really important question. So I'm not a health expert or a scientist. So let me summarize the kind of independent advice from the experts. But I'd really encourage people, because I understand, and I've heard myself some of these concerns that people feel for some understandable reasons, to go out there and seek these independent views from the experts who had nothing to do with 5G in the telecoms industry, the independent health experts and scientists. So very simply, the bodies that look after public health, I think, as we all know, now even more so during the coronavirus, are bodies like the World Health Organization, Public Health England. These are independent bodies led by scientists. And in the case of mobile technologies, 4G, 5G, 3G, for many decades, they have led work themselves. They've reviewed scientific documents, and there is no evidence that 5G or 4G or 3G causes health issues. There are various surveys of it. You can download lots of information about it. You can see where the radio spectrums are, and there are very strict guidelines that have got even stricter now, relating to the positioning of mobile phone masts and engineers' proximity to them, and all sorts of things. So there's no evidence whatsoever from the independent experts that 5G or 4G or any of the other mobile technologies cause health problems. And in the UK, we're using the same radio spectrum and other things that we've used before. There were definitely some really dangerous and unfounded theories that went further and suggested that 5G was somehow related to coronavirus. That is emphatically complete nonsense, and a very dangerous thing for some people to have suggested. So I think that's been widely disproven. But I do think, Ninder, I think one of the challenging things about the world we live in today is that for some people on social media, it kind of appears that the view of an independent scientist is worth the same as the view of somebody else, because it all kind of appears in a Twitter feed or a WhatsApp as being equally legitimate. So I think the only thing I can do, as I try and do myself, is just really encourage people to go out and really try and access some of those independent reports by the experts at WHO and Public Health England and others, and hopefully they can then make up their own minds.
You mentioned earlier on, when we spoke about the word opportunity, and what opportunities technology, particularly if it's deployed properly, can bring, and how this is an opportunity for private and public sector to work together to make it better for local communities to benefit from technology. But of course, we live in a world that's globally connected and politically connected, and of course, it wasn't that long ago that Mr. Trump, and mind you, he wasn't alone. There was the Australians and I think New Zealand and quite a few other countries who thought Huawei and China were a bit of a problem. And of course, then the Tory government decided to follow suit and asked Huawei to be stripped out of that infrastructure. Now, with that sort of political move against the very opportunity you just referred to, what's been the implication? Is that going to slow 5G down? Is it going to make 5G more expensive? Is it going to mean that now it's not going to be the rollout we thought it was going to be? Or is it quite simply just a delay?
Yeah, great question. So as you say, the UK government took the decision, I think about 6 months ago, that Huawei equipment that had been used in some mobile phone networks for 5G needs to be swapped out by 2027 to allow time for that equipment to be replaced. So I think it will inevitably have an impact in terms of a delay in some areas to the rollout of 5G. I don't think there's a definitive position on that. I think all the operators who've been affected by it are still working it through. I think government listened very carefully to industry, and actually the timeframe they proposed was a considered timeframe that I think was in line with the industry feedback. But nevertheless, I think it will have a short-term impact on some of the speed of the rollout. But also, I think it probably also creates a medium-term opportunity in the UK as well. So the mobile phone kind of technology market has traditionally been dominated by some of the larger equipment providers, companies like Ericsson and Nokia. And while they continue to do a great job and continue to invest, I think there's an opportunity with this new technology, probably for others to enter the market and to innovate the market. And I really think with some of the work that the UK is pioneering around 5G, we can, and some of the R&D work we do through our universities, we can try and have a pretty good stab actually at encouraging some of those businesses to either locate here or be started here. So yes, I think it will have an impact, but I think the time frame that they've allowed is such that it won't be a dramatic impact. And I think there's another opportunity around, how can we encourage more businesses into this space? How can we encourage new models? I mean, there's a type of an emerging type of mobile phone technology called Open RAN, and I won't bore you with what it stands for or what it means, but essentially it's a set of open technology standards that are developing. And if those standards can be supported, can be encouraged, it's the kind of thing that, in the same way that we've taken for granted open standards in, the world of IT for many years in terms of hardware, software, cloud, all of those other types of things that can make a real difference in terms of competition and innovation. So I think, yes, it will have an impact, but hopefully there's an opportunity as well.
We spoke about resistance. We've seen resistance from people who say 5G is just terrible. But we've also seen resistance from people who just don't like big masts intruding out into their community. So do you think we're going to see a disparity across the country where we will see 5G strong because the communities embraced it, but that in other areas, because of the resistance to these things, there's going to be less of a 5G? And is that really simply just duplicating what we have at the moment with broadband and fiber in inner city centres and outside? Does that make sense? In other words,
it does.
Are we going to stay where we are with 4G and for 5G simply because people just don't like it?
It's a really important question. It's vital we all take our communities with us on the opportunity. I think, it's to your earlier question, I think people quite understandably probably don't yet understand what the benefits of this new technology are going to be. And I think if we aren't clear on what the benefits are and why we all need it, then it's really understandable that we're as citizens ourselves not going to be willing to to sort of deal with some of the challenges that the mobile phone coverage will provide. So you are right. In some instances, there is a need to build new masts, and in some instances there is a need to build taller masts. So what I'm trying to do is to work with colleagues in the local authorities and the operators to try and share these benefits. We have to be respectful then, obviously, of the laws that quite rightly exist to govern these types of developments or redevelopments, and also the views of local communities. And I think there's much more we can do there. But I think if we do those things, be respectful of local communities and do everything we can to minimize the impact and communicate the benefits, then I hope that we can think about this a little bit like, the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. Back in those days, we needed to build roads, we needed to build railways. These days, we need to build or extend telecoms infrastructure because effectively, as you were saying, broadband and now mobile technology, including 5G, is becoming the sort of fourth utility that we all rely on. So I hope if we can understand that, then hopefully we can create a space for us to think about what this infrastructure can do. And I think also, if I may add one more point, I think in a world now where we some of us now have the opportunity, thankfully, to spend more time in our communities as a result of lockdown and perhaps some of the new hybrid working practices. I think having really good digital connectivity, but both fibre and mobile, into those communities that supports those communities, hopefully enables over time a higher quality of life. But having said all of that, it's very easy to say that. And I do appreciate, when any of us get a planning application for a new mobile phone mast that's going to, appear to be an eyesore at the end of our road or somewhere nearby, it's obviously going to cause us concern and needs to be something that's properly scrutinised and properly debated to make sure that the trade-offs are really offset by the benefits.
I know it's early doors, and I know WM5G hasn't been around that long. But in the short time it has been around, what has it delivered? What's it proven so far? And what benefits? And I know it's difficult because it's been around that long. But what have we learned so far that can help us going forward?
Great question. So we've got two key objectives that relate very clearly to benefits. So the first is to work in partnership with the local authorities and the operators and the communities in the region to accelerate the rollout of connectivity. We want to co-create the most connected region. And so I would say the first thing that we've achieved is through a really strong partnership across those stakeholders, we've accelerated the rollout of 5G and fibre across the West Midlands to such an extent that although it's still largely focused on the city centres, as I mentioned earlier, the West Midlands was recognised a few months ago by independent analysts as having the best 5G coverage in the UK so far. And remember, the UK is one of the countries that leads the world at this point in 5G. So that's the first thing we've delivered. And I think what we've learned through that process is how we can act as a trusted advisor to both organisations like the local authorities who own some of the assets that the mobile phone masts need to go on, the communities, and also the mobile operators to make sure that we have the right approach that gets 5G out there, but also takes people with it. And I think that's something that our colleagues and our supporters in central government will now be taking out across the country in terms of how that works. The second thing we've been focused on in terms of benefits is how do we actually use the 5G networks as they roll out to transform public services, businesses, and also over time, hopefully services that help citizens. And I'm really delighted of our progress, although there is still more to do in the sectors I've mentioned. So I think in healthcare, firstly, starting to prove the opportunity to provide better patient care at point of first contact in the system is something that really I think all of us can empathise with. The question now there is how do we scale that? So how do we create the products and services and how do we create the business model to scale that? On transport, we've rolled out the first 5G road sensor network, so these video cameras and other sensors connecting back to the traffic control centres, and we're starting to prove the benefit of that in improving traffic flows, because something like 50% of the traffic lights in the West Midlands aren't currently connected to anything. So the phasing of those is not necessarily aligned with the traffic needs. So I'm excited about where that can go next, working with Transport for West Midlands, because I think we've got to get the economy moving again. And therefore having a transport system that can support people better is key to getting people back in a safe way to our city centres and getting some of those industries that have been hit particularly hard up and running. And finally, I'm really delighted with the work that we're starting in manufacturing as well, in terms of what I mentioned before of starting to demonstrate the opportunity to improve productivity. But if I could just say one last thing, I mean, I joined up West Midlands 5G, and I hope that you will see through the work that we're leading to make a real difference, or to try and make a real difference to people in the West Midlands, to businesses and to public services. And I think to do that, as well as doing the innovation work, what I really want to focus on in the next 12 months is how we scale up that innovation, and working with the private sector and the public sector, put that into the hands of citizens and of businesses and public services. And I think that does require some of the things we were talking about before, things like support with skills, for example, things like support with access to resources, and other areas of support. So I think we're starting to prove some benefits, but I think there's more to do.
We're on to the last few minutes, so I'm probably going to finish with a sort of like a big question. So just leading on to that, so people have made observations that during COVID, the digitization process has accelerated. We are ordering more stuff via delivery, digital.
Yeah.
We are certainly communicating more, such as you and I now through Zoom and Teams and things. So that's happening a lot. But they're also saying, so if that process continues, the digital approach continues, and 5G enhances the ability to do that, actually, instead of making the country richer, our recovery from COVID will be like a K shape, which is for those who use digital products, they will continue to prosper. But those who are deprived of laptops, mobiles, whatever it is, they more blue collar, they will tend to go downward. So how do you counter that? 5G actually may make the situation economically worse for certain parts of society.
I think it's a really important question. So I'm not sure I've got the full answer to that question, but let me offer my thoughts. So I think, as you say, digital in its broadest sense, so 5G, data, applications, is becoming part of everything. And one of the unfortunate consequences of it becoming part of everything is that the divide between winners and losers in business, and also people who have it and people who don't have it in society is increasing. And probably like you, it's been absolutely heartbreaking to hear stories in the news of children who can't access education because either they don't have connectivity or hardware, or they lack the space, the quiet space in their home or apartment or whatever to access education as well. So it feels to me that, as you say, kind of connectivity and some of these digital services are moving from a nice to have to being an imperative. And I think we need to look at society as what the right models and approaches are to close the digital divide. And I think, as I say, I think it's a complicated issue. Some of it in some demographics does relate to skills and confidence and all sorts of understandable things. And I don't want to generalize about older generations because I'm not sure that it's accurate, but clearly there are elderly people who really do struggle for all sorts of understandable reasons to get online. And then equally there's other reasons as well in terms of deprivation, in terms of access to connectivity. So I think we've got to make sure as a society that we've got the right programs in place to address each of those facets. And I think some of that is about new models and also recognizing that the better off need to support some of the other stakeholders in society, because we can't have an 80-20 model where, as you say, the gap between the rich and the poor and the haves and have-nots grows further. But also, I think it's also worth me saying this. So while it's true that clearly, the really big internet players, the so-called, GAFAs, the, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Netflix, etc., seem to have really done extremely well so far under the conditions of lockdown. I think it's also true that many businesses have really just been struggling to survive. So actually, I think what we've also got to recognize is that I think talk of COVID accelerating digital is slightly overblown, I think, for many businesses. And actually what we need to do is to support them to change their underlying services, their underlying processes, their underlying skills to do that. And that's something that the Combined Authority is starting to do with their digital skills program, and something that I hope we can support them to do in the future. So I do definitely see the risk that you highlight of that gap in widening, and I actually think it's in everybody's interest to come together and find the right way of closing it.
Final question, Robert. You've been fantastic. We've spoken about a number of things. So if 5G is rolled out successfully, then the economy will benefit through increased productivity, through increased skill set, through increased quality, where the product will move through a business in and out much quicker. It will help in terms of the transport of the goods, because we can use traffic lights and traffic systems a lot more efficiently. Environment's a big problem, so we can reduce congestion because people are moving much quicker because there's intelligence camera work. Obviously the population is getting older. NHS is under considerable distress, not just because of COVID, but generally of the population. So 5G can assist in maybe sometimes predicting health problems, moving health problems quicker, more preventative rather than having to cure. A lot of things that can happen if 5G is rolled out very successfully. So out of all of that lot, and I know you made a brilliant point earlier on with that, it could be so successful, actually, we don't even notice it. But what ultimately, how will you in 10, 15 years sit back, have a smile on your face? What will tell you what success looks like? How will you know that we've done something right here? And I know you said it could be so good we don't even notice, but so my final question really, how will you know?
That is a brilliant question. So I would like to think that we will know if it's been successful in 10 or 15 years' time by imagining what the world was like as we're talking now, and some of the things we used to do, and how much better the world is then. So if I take an example from 4G, and then I'll talk about 5G. So I'm sure, like you, I remember the days of standing on street corners to get a taxi, or going to taxi ranks, and of course we still do some of those things today. But pre-pandemic, I didn't think twice about ordering an Uber taxi or other companies with that model. That whole thing around you've got an app, it's got your location, it's got your details in. You can you just don't really think twice about that. It's become part of the fabric of of one of the ways that many of us travel around from time to time. So I think for me it's about thinking about what are those critical examples that we all take for granted now of doing in a certain way, and can we evidence that new services have emerged that make a tangible difference to our lives, and that I think there's unlikely to be a single kind of silver bullet where we go, that's the use case for 5G, in the same way that I couldn't really say that there's a single use case for kind of 4G and there's a single app on smartphones. I think it's going to be lots of things. But I think what's important is, while I appreciate that we'd all like to have the clarity on exactly what is success going to look like in 10 to 15 years time, and we're certainly working as hard as we can in the West Midlands to shape it, I really would encourage everyone who's listening to this podcast and interested in 5G, actually, you can be part of the innovation that happens around 5G, whether you're involved in the technology or not. Think about the problems and opportunities you face in your life, your business, your work, and other areas. How can this technology help you? Because I think if we can seize the opportunity to lead and shape and drive that innovation in the UK, it will make the success that we need it to. If we just rely on the 5G industry, if you like, to come up with the answer for the technology, it may not be that successful, because obviously, you know, without the participation of experts in healthcare or entertainment or retail or whatever the areas are, you know, we won't know what the problems are we can apply this to. So I think it's a great question. And as I say, I think for me, it's going to be all about how have we changed things that we all use to make them better. And I think if we do that, then we'll be able to also say it's created jobs, it's created new companies, it's attracted investment, it's improved the economic output and social standing of the UK.
Well, I'm going to put a diary in 10 years' time.
Mm.
We're going to sit down. I'm going to say, do you remember 10 years ago? And by that stage, your response will be 5G. Listen, we're now on to 15G. What's 5G? And at that point,
I'll buy you a beer for that. I look forward to that very much. I look forward to that very much.
So it's not 5G anymore. We're moving into 6G, 7G.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. If not more. But no, I look forward to that. We will definitely do that. That's a date in 10 years' time.
Then we'll review. Robert, you've been fantastic. It's a complicated world. It's a complicated technology-driven world where uncertainty is just so key. But as you said, humans are now having to progress quicker than we've ever done. And we can't ignore technology, can't ignore 5G. And in 10 years, as we said, it could be 17G. In the meantime, Robert, thanks for all your time. It's been brilliant listening to the intricacies of 5G and technology and how we're all adapting to a completely new world. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for the opportunity, Ninder, and the great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.